If you've been following this series from the beginning, this is going to be the 6th video in my series, and this is where I'm working on bag 5. Bag 5 is got a lot of parts in it, and it's got the front gearbox and all the front suspension in it. And so I am going to actually record bag 5 in a couple videos. The first one that I'm doing here is going to focus on shimming the diff and building the gearbox. And so since this is going to be a longer series to get through all of bag 5, let's get started. So here we are in table view of the gearbox components and a few other items from bag 5. As you can see, for the gearbox, just one parts tree. They were kind enough to actually remove this one from the parts tray. It looks like there's a little flashing there. Maybe a flashing somewhere on here as well. I don't know, I don't see that. This one looks like it's maybe pretty good. Oh, right in there. There's a little bit of a flashing. So we'll trim this off really quick. Get that one taken care of. There we go. Those are all cleaned off. These things are hanging on by a thread. Cut these off. All right, get rid of that tree now. And so the first part of this gearbox build, we're gonna be looking at, that actually has a little bit of a bulge right there too. Let's see if we can't trim that back. Yeah. All right. All taken care of there. So yeah, we're gonna start with this piece, and this is the ring gear that interfaces with the differential, and we're gonna start by putting this ring gear in. So we're gonna need 2 bearings, and again, the blue always goes out. So we're gonna put that one in there, blue out. Actually, sometimes this one I'll flip it the other way, but we're gonna put it that way. And then blue out for sure on this one. Put those in there good and tight. And then you drop this pinion in. And you can see how on a Truggy, to get it right, these pinions are really small. This is a 10-tooth pinion interfacing with a 46-tooth ring gear. So those are pretty small, and because of the small diameter on these pinion gears, it's critical that you shim Truggy diffs correctly, and you shim them differently than a buggy diff. And so we're gonna go over that. Before I do that though, we're gonna put this universal, which is the center drive line for the forward diff. And I will tell you, before I started this video, I sprayed you can use like electronics cleaner or brake cleaner, but I sprayed it in here, either that or motor spray. But I sprayed it in here to make sure there's no grease. And then I did the same thing with this set screw. Sprayed it in there to make sure there's no like cutting oils left on it. Because it's what I've found, when you build a new vehicle for the first time, this set screw is difficult to keep in until you've got kind of a little gooey residue from the thread lock built up on it. And so I like to spray those ones out with motor spray and clean them really good. And then I like to put a lot more thread lock. Like this is the only one where I'd say there's never, like you can't really put too much on this. So yeah, is what I do is you can, you know, you want to line this flat spot here. Hopefully you can see that. Let me pull that out and show you. The set screw is gonna go in to that little flat spot. And so you want to make sure that's pointed up when you have it in here, and then you put this set screw hole so you can see that. And then I always push this tight. So these two squeeze it and do it tight. And see how it spins and feels. So yeah, we got a lot of thread lock here. We'll wipe that off. And then I see how this spins. And like a lot of times now that I've wiped that thread lock excess off, I'll come in and just crack that off and just give it like just ever so much backlash to help it spin. And like right now these bearings are full of grease, and so there's some resistance. And you definitely want to, for an 8 scale, you'd like, some people clean the grease out of these bearings on their 10th scale cars, but for an 8 scale I always leave the grease in for that protection from the elements. But yeah, so just like a tiny bit of backlash is okay, but you don't want to have too much because of the issue that you can have with this gear mesh. So now right off the bat, actually we're going to do one more thing. I think before we go in to that, we're going to put this little piece in here, and this thing goes in this way here. It's just a little actually it goes in this way. It's just like a little cover for this, and this little teeny set or little teeny flathead screw holds this thing in. So we're gonna put that on. Make sure we're getting it in there nice and straight. Looks good. All right. And don't, you know, the smaller the screw, the less amount of torque you want to put on them. Don't go crazy on these little small screws or you'll strip it out from day one. So then, next thing we're going to do here is shim the diff. Actually, one comment, these screws here, they came in the bag with these standoffs for the shocks and this universal, and the reason they did that is because these screws are for the droop screw, and they actually have a hex head cut in the tip as well as another one cut in the traditional head. And so you want to keep these segregated because you want to use them for your droop screws, not get those mixed up. So I'm just going to put those down here. So now we're going to put this diff in, and is what you want to do on the diff is you want to shim it. On a buggy, you shim these diffs where there's a little bit of backlash, kind of similar to how you would set your Mod 1 pinion mesh on the motor to spur gear. So you'll have a little bit of backlash. But on a Truggy, because this pinion is so small, if you do that, it'll skip teeth. Especially when you jump and land hard, it'll skip teeth. So you want to shim this where you really don't have any backlash. Only for Truggy you want to do this. And so I'm doing 2 shims on this side and 1 on this side, and that's gonna make this gear mesh, I think, pretty tight. But let's see. We'll stick this thing in here. You kind of have to sometimes massage these shims in place. I don't always like to cooperate. This side is being a little bit of a bugger. Like sometimes if you rotate them around, it'll help. But here we go. Yeah, see, I would say this thing, there's still a little backlash in it. But before I say it's too much, I'm gonna put this case on and tighten it and just feel what it feels like with that case on. And if there's still backlash, then I'm gonna come out, I'm gonna take this back apart and put that 3rd shim on the other side. So you're gonna have 3 shims. The other thing you can do is, this screw's a little crooked, so I'm gonna back it off, help that go in a little straighter. All right. The other thing you can do too is you would have to buy this separate, but you can actually put a little, if you're getting too many shims on the diff, you won't be able to get this case closed. And so to fix that problem, you can buy a shim that you put on the back side of the pinion gear, and you can actually shim that pinion gear out to accomplish the same thing. You don't normally need to do that, but if you're really struggling to get a tight gear mesh and fit all the shims in there, then you can do that. Okay, we get this all nice and tight. The bottom looks fully seated. It's good to check this gear mesh kind of like on the 4 quadrants too, because like sometimes these things aren't fully concentric. I mean, I will say there is like ever so slight gear mesh issue, but I'm gonna run with this. This is just barely a tiny bit of backlash on this is all we have. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it that way. So now that we got that sorted out, you would go in and put grease on this ring gear and then move it around to get it on the pinion gear. And so I will get that grease, and because this thing's in a little tub, I'm going to use my X-Acto to put it on. And for my 8 scales, I use a decent amount. When I'm running my 10th scales, I actually don't normally lubricate the gearbox at all, especially if it's a stock car, because I find it's got less friction. Okay, so we put that grease in there, and I'm just gonna sit here and work this in. I mean, you can see, you can get an idea of how tight this is just by how much it spins. On a buggy, that would spin quite a bit better. Yeah, that should be Actually, I'm going to put a little more grease on this just to make sure, since it's tighter. Glob a little more in there, right there. You can kind of see where it's still a little bit dry and add grease to those areas. All right. That's all good now. And then finally here, we're going to put, this is the sway bar holder. And we're going to stick this thing, these are on the AE one, they're hinged. And so we're going to stick this long screw through here and close this hinge off. And you can see on this hinge, this side has got more material than this side. So this is, you want this to go in that way. So it's threading into this side kind of like a nut, whereas this is the pass-through hole on the other side. So we'll get out our Allen 1.5. Yeah, see, it just dropped in. So we screw that in, and we're gonna leave that just a little, yeah, just so we can move that in and out. All right. The next step with the gearbox is it moves into suspension stuff, and so I am gonna say that this round of this video has been completed. We shimmed this diff, and when we get to the rear diff, we are gonna do the same thing. We're gonna shim it the same tightness as we did with this one, just to make sure it. And you know, when you mount this in the car, there's two screws that come through here and go into this case. And you just want to maybe check that backlash and how free it is one more time, because it can sometimes pull this case in a little bit and make it tighter. So just, you'll check it again. That wraps up the front gearbox build of Bag 5. And hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you did, continue to follow me through this build, and you can go to the little circle, RCX circle, and click that at the end of this video to subscribe. And also, you'll notice in all of my build videos that in the description, I'm actually putting a list and links to all the products I use to make these videos. So if you missed that on the earlier videos, feel free to go back, but I try to include all the tools I use in the description, and hope people find that helpful.